What's up, Sanisa, Superbad Estrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, David Lemieux is staying in shape, hopes to return to the ring very soon. Last December, Lemieux displayed a lot of rust when he suffered 2 knockdowns and struggled to overcome Maxime Bersac by virtue of a close decision. The 31-year-old swore that he would never repeat the same mistake, but an injury and the COVID-19 pandemic has held him back, despite all of his good intentions. I learned my lesson. The absence from the ring was too long, and I felt rusty in the ring. We have a plan in place this year to avoid having such a long period of inactivity, said Lemieux to TVA Sports. The plan was to be active, but with the pandemic, we still have a problem. It will still be a bit longer, but everyone is in the same boat. It's sad, but I can't do anything about it. He was deprived of a clash with Polish contender Robert Talarik in February due to a back injury. Lemieux still hopes to deliver this fight, and he's ready to do anything to quickly practice the sport he loves. The recovery plans are quite short. There's nothing concrete, but I stay in shape, I train every day, I have no problem with a closed-doors fight. My supporters are always there to add to the atmosphere, but my career is at stake, so we have to keep moving. The silver lining for David Lemieux is that he is on a bit of a streak. You know, he's won his last 3 fights since dropping that decision to Billy Joe Saunders in what was a boxing lesson that he got from Billy Joe Saunders. But David, he is on a 3-fight winning streak, although he didn't look good in his last fight. In his last fight
in December
against Maxime Bersac, where he was dropped 2 times. You know, from the time that he fought Gary Spike O'Sullivan and wrapped him up
in the first round,
that was in September of 2018. David didn't return to action until December of 2019, and the way that breaks down, that's basically saying that it had been over a year's time between those 2 fights, and that's just not conducive towards the continuation of David Lemieux's career. You know, the last couple of years, when you weren't hearing about David struggling to make the weight, middleweight at that time, he has since moved up to super middleweight, but the last couple of years, when you weren't hearing about him struggling to make the weight, you were hearing about how often this guy was injured. I mean, he's injury prone. He's coming off an injury now, a back injury that prevented him from having a fight this past February.
It's rough.
Even worse is that David's not an old guy. You know, this isn't a guy who's in his mid-30s. David Lemieux's only 31 years old, but it does appear that David's body is breaking down on him. The wear and tear that fighters accumulate over time is beginning to catch up with David Lemieux at only 31 years old, and he's yet to really make a splash in this weight class, 168, super middleweight. David's got a lot of problems, you know, he's got a lot of unique problems. David's one of these guys that's too big to make one weight, but he's on the smaller end of the spectrum, the other. It's a problem that I think Gervonta Davis is facing or will face down the line. It's a problem that we saw Curtis Stevens face years ago. Curtis Stevens, he's a beefy guy, but he doesn't have the most statuesque dimensions, doesn't have the biggest frame, and that's a problem. I think that's a problem that David is facing, that, you know, you were pretty good for middleweight, but at super middleweight, you're on the smaller end of the spectrum, and while John Ryder might come to mind, John Ryder, who is also on the smaller end of the spectrum, John Ryder isn't injury prone the way that David Lemieux is.
Is he?
It's not just any one thing holding David back. That pressure fighting style of his, bearing down on his opponents to land big punches, that might have worked in the middleweight division, but at super middleweight, trying that kind of stuff against those big guys up there, just don't know how far he's going to get with that. That's on top of being an injury-prone fighter. I wish the guy nothing but the best, but if you want me to be honest, I think he needs to navigate very carefully in the super middleweight division because his body's breaking down, he doesn't have the adequate dimensions that make for longevity in this weight class, and he doesn't have the base style for it either. It really feels like David Lemieux, God bless him, and for all his best efforts, he's on borrowed time. Well, Michael Benson tweeted, Canelo Alvarez's trainer, Eddie Reynoso, has declared that they still intend for him to fight twice this year, in September and December. Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, and David Benavidez considered for September. The Golovkin trilogy could be in December. It does seem that Canelo Alvarez is trying to get the most out of this year as he can before 2020 is over, having that number of fights in that amount of time. I think that lends insight into how he views not who he'll be fighting in September, but how he views Gennady Golovkin.
What do you mean?
You wouldn't expect someone with the kind of drawing power, marquee value of a Canelo Alvarez to try to squeeze in 2 separate fights in that duration of time. You wouldn't expect that. Because, perhaps one of the fights might be very difficult, might be very arduous, the wear and tear that fighters suffer over time. Yet Canelo Alvarez feels adept to the task to have not only a fight in September, but another in December. The one in December being the fight against Gennady Golovkin. Gennady Golovkin, who not that long ago, Canelo Alvarez said, posed no challenge.
Remember that?
I mean, the way this breaks down is Canelo means to have 2 separate fights, 2 separate matches, in less than 6 months. He means to cap off the year with the Golovkin fight. And I think that if he means to cap off the year with the Golovkin fight, it's because he's confident that he can take him out. That even if the fight in September proves a little bit difficult, a little bit frustrating, he'll still have enough at the end of the year to take old man Golovkin out.
That's what this looks like.
I mean, why else would you want to cap off the year with a Golovkin fight when you're considering names like Billy Joe Saunders, like Caleb Plant, like David Benavidez?
Yeah!
If these are the kind of guys that you plan on fighting in September,
These 3.
any one of these 3 guys has the potential to put up a decent fight. They do. And if you feel that you can have a fight with any one of these 3 fighters in September and move into a Golovkin fight in December, it's likely because you don't feel Golovkin has much left. Regardless of which one of these 3 guys you pick, Caleb, David, or Billy, you feel that you can cap off the year with Golovkin because to you, Golovkin is the lighter touch.
What it looks like.
We all saw how Gennady Golovkin looked against Sergey Devianchenko. We all saw it. I'm pretty sure that Canelo Alvarez saw it.
He did.
My only question now is how soon does Gennady Golovkin want to have that Canelo rubber match? We know that he's supposed to be fighting Camille Zeremata.
The Canelo fight on hold.
Gennady doesn't seem to be placing as much emphasis fighting Canelo Alvarez as he was before in those $14 million paydays. I think those have a lot to do with why. He got something like $14 million for Steve Rolls. Another $14 million for Sergey Devianchenko. When you're bringing in those kinds of paydays to fight those kinds of guys, suddenly fighting Canelo Alvarez doesn't seem as necessary. Not when you can make that kind of money fighting those kinds of fighters.
Who needs Canelo?
The question I have is, after the Camille Zeremata fight, will Gennady Golovkin choose to go into the rubber match, or will he try to find someone else to fight?
Instead of going into the rubber match.
And in that rubber match, there is a chance that Canelo Alvarez might actually knock out Gennady this time. As Father Time is catching up to Gennady the way that he catches up to everyone. Gennady's not the unstoppable juggernaut that he used to be.
He's getting old.
He's on the slide. And if he gets knocked out by Canelo Alvarez, how much longer do you think he stays in the sport of boxing?
Exactly.
Maybe it's for this reason they're putting that off, Maybe it's for this reason they chose to go the Camille Zeremata route instead of going right into that rubber match so that they can get the most out of this DAZN deal as they can before Golovkin calls it a career. We can see what Canelo Alvarez wants to do before the year is out. The question is Gennady Golovkin on board for just such a situation in that kind of time frame, on that kind of schedule? Now, of the 3 names mentioned for what could be Canelo Alvarez's very next fight, Caleb Plant, David Benavidez, Billy Joe Saunders, I think that Caleb is going to have to put his money where his mouth is. Very recently, he was quoted as saying that now would be the opportune time to have the Canelo Alvarez fight, where he had turned it down before. You guys remember what Caleb's problem with the fight was, that he just fought in February. Fighting in May was too soon for him. Make of that what you will. Very recently, he did say that he'd accept that fight now. So I wonder, if Golden Boy makes him an offer, is he going to take it? In truth, these 3 opponent options, they're interchangeable. Caleb Plant is just as good an opponent choice as David Benavidez, and David Benavidez is just as good an opponent choice as Billy Joe Saunders. Neither one of these 3 guys have proven so much, done so much in the super middleweight division that any one of them is head and shoulders above the other 2.
They're interchangeable.
I'd say that Billy Joe Saunders is perhaps a little bit less proven at this weight than either Caleb or David, but Billy Joe Saunders, he is a 2-division champion, so it's still a solid choice. This is an undefeated world titleist at 168 pounds. I think that Billy Joe Saunders is the likeliest candidate to get this fight, I do. Given what side of the street that Billy Joe Saunders is on, the fact that he basically landed the fight before COVID-19 shut everything down. There might be blurbs about a Caleb Plant fight, blurbs about a David Benavidez fight, but in truth, I'm not sure that Caleb really wants that fight. I'm not. And when it comes to David, Samson Lukowicz, who handles the career of David Benavidez, that guy's not ready to put David in there with Caleb. So why would he be ready to put him in there with Canelo?
That's a fair question.
Oh, maybe David wants the fight. Maybe David's enthusiastic about it. Maybe he wants the opportunity, but I'm not sure that Samson Lukowicz wants that for him, as Canelo Alvarez is a more proven fighter than a Caleb Plant.
Isn't he?
And we see what stance Samson has taken when it comes to Plant versus Benavidez. He thinks this needs more marination. He wants his guy to have 2 more fights before he puts him in that situation. So if you're not ready to match your guy against a Caleb Plant, why would you be ready to match your guy against a more proven guy in Canelo Alvarez? Ultimately, I think that it's going to be Billy Joe Saunders that gets this fight. I do. I think Billy Joe Saunders is the likeliest candidate to get the fight. It's the easier fight to make given what side of the street Billy's on and what platform both he and Canelo fight on. I'm assuming that if boxing resumes in September and Canelo Alvarez returns in that amount of time, it will be Billy Joe Saunders that he locks horns with. And, you know, that's just as respectable a choice as the aforementioned 2. So that's what I'm expecting to see. In other news coming out of the super middleweight division, Daniel Jacobs had this to say about Caleb Plant. Caleb Plant has a lot of flaws. He hasn't been tested. The unbeaten Plant, who owns the IBF super middleweight title, took offense to the comments Jacobs made to Hearn. Plant dubbed Jacobs old and on his way out during a subsequent interview with FightHype.com. Daniel Jacobs was quoted as saying, "Obviously a boxer wants to get under another boxer's skin." Jacobs said during a recent appearance on the Ak and Barak show on SiriusXM. He wants to say things. "I was only being honest when someone asked me who I thought was the weakest link among the super middleweight champions. But I did forget about Billy Joe Saunders. And I would like to say Billy Joe Saunders out of the champions is the weakest link. But I don't take back my statements as far as what I said about Caleb Plant. He does have a lot of flaws. I think he hasn't been tested. I think he's still kind of fresh. He's still kind of green. And if you want to get it on, he already knows. And I'm the type of fighter I can go. I have opportunities to work for other different promotions. If that fight wants to be made, we can do it, you know? I'm his big brother. He knows what's up." The 33-year-old Jacobs could make more money to fight Saunders or WBA champion Callum Smith, but he says a fight with Plant can be arranged. Danny Jacobs is a good fighter, and he's been around for a while, Plant said, but he's more of an athletic fighter, you know? He fights more off his athletic ability. I don't think Danny Jacobs is the man for the job, you know what I'm saying? He's been beat. He's been in some tough fights, and I just don't think he's an A-class fighter. Nevertheless, the thought of boxing Jacobs appeals to Plant. "I would love to fight him," Plant said. "I would put a boxing lesson on him." You know, these two guys exchanging pleasantries.
Very entertaining.
It's all very entertaining. Makes for good conversation. But the reality of it is, I don't see this fight materializing. Daniel Jacobs is on the same side of the street as Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, John Ryder. Fights that could get Daniel Jacobs more bang for his buck than a Caleb Plant fight would or could. I'm not telling you I'm against the fight. I'm not telling you I wouldn't like to see it. I would like to see it. I think Daniel Jacobs as an opponent option for Caleb is far more interesting than either Mike Lee or Vincent Fagenboots was.
Yeah.
To Daniel Jacobs' point that Caleb Plant hasn't been tested, I disagree with that. I do. I think that, you know, Caleb Plant, for what it's worth, he beat a very solid guy in Jose Uzcategui, a reigning champion at the time.
Remember?
And while a fighter of very limited ability, like a Vincent Fagenboots, well, he's not taking the world by storm, that is a very solid scalp. I mean, at minimum, we can say that. It's a solid guy.
We can say that.
Caleb handled him easy. Shut him out. I don't think that Caleb has distinguished himself yet as the very best fighter in the super middleweight division, but to say that he hasn't been tested, I'm not sure how accurate that is. I don't agree with Daniel Jacobs' statements, but regardless of whether I agree or disagree, I don't see this fight happening. It wouldn't make sense for Daniel Jacobs to cross over to the PBC side of things for a Caleb Plant fight when he can make more money staying right there where he is and fighting the likes of Callum Smith or Billy Joe Saunders, or maybe tuning up with a John Ryder. Currently, there are rumblings of a potential Gabe Rosado fight. We know those two guys. They've been saying a lot of shit about each other. Those guys, they've been going back and forth. I don't see Danny crossing over to the PBC for Caleb Plant, and I don't see Caleb crossing over to Matchroom for Daniel Jacobs. I just don't.
Sorry.
We'll say that's the only way I see this thing happening. If Caleb is willing to cross over for what Matchroom has to offer, as Matchroom can ensure that Caleb makes more money fighting Danny than he would fighting any of those other guys over there on the PBC side of things. It's not that they don't have options over there. They do. There's Anthony Durrell. But I don't think you're going to make the money for Durrell that you would make for Daniel Jacobs.
Yeah, I don't think so.
As far as I'm concerned, this is just the latest in what has been a string of what I like to call COVID call-outs. There's a lot of people saying a lot of things about a lot of other people that ultimately, once boxing resumes, won't materialize into anything.
That won't result in a fight.
These two guys, they can say whatever they want to say about each other. The reality of it is Daniel Jacobs is more likely to fight either Gabe Rosado or John Ryder in preparation for what could be a Callum Smith fight than he is to fight Caleb Plant. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If you're Caleb Plant, and you want to have big fights, you really want to start shaking shit up. You see that Benavidez fight, that's not about to happen. The best thing for you to do is to change your ambiance. See about crossing over to Matchroom. I mean, I don't think it's very likely that this is going to happen. I don't think it's very likely that Caleb is going to cross over.
But he should.
But as far as whether or not he should, yes, I think he should. There are two world champions on that side of the street, and that's not counting Daniel Jacobs. That's not counting John Ryder, unless we forget that all of these fighters fight on the same platform as the cash cow of the division, and in many ways the cash cow of boxing in this side of the world, Canelo Alvarez. What are you going to do? You going to stay on the PBC side of things, sitting on your hands, waiting for that Benavidez fight to roll around? Who are you going to fight in the mean in-between time? You're going to risk it all against guys like Anthony Durrell,
Probably.
making less money than you would make on the Matchroom side of things. And as much sense as it might make to either I or you for Caleb to cross over and see what Matchroom's got to offer, the reality of it is he might not. Gervonta Davis didn't cross over for that Farmer fight.
Right.
Jamal Charlo didn't cross over for that Andrade fight. And both of these guys, they were offered a lot of fucking money. I mean, do you think Gervonta Davis made anything to the tune of $6 to $7 million for fighting either Ricardo Munoz or Hugo Ruiz? Do you think that's the kind of money he made fighting those fighters? Because that's the kind of money they offered him to fight Farmer, but he didn't take it. Do you think that Jamal Charlo made that kind of money fighting Matt Korobov or Brandon Adams? Dennis Hogan. You think fighting Dennis Hogan gets you $6-7 million? But in spite of this, Jamal Charlo, he didn't take the money. He didn't cross over. And in all likelihood, Caleb Plant won't cross over. So it's really much ado about nothing.